One of the most iconic Scottish kings was Robert the Bruce, a man who led the nation during the First War of the Scottish independence against the English. He did manage to restore Scotland to being an independent nation during his reign, and he is considered a hero today alongside others such as William Wallace. He was a man who took on the might of Edward I, the English king who was known as the Hammer of the Scots, but he was someone who was able to consolidate his power through defeating rebels and those who did not support him. At the Battle of Bannockburn, he managed to mastermind the defeat of the much larger English army of Edward II of England, but Robert the Bruce did die in the June of 1329, and his remains were subject to a significant amount of shocking treatment, after his heart was buried somewhere else, and his internal organs were also buried in another place, with his corpse and his body being interred elsewhere. He is actually buried in 3 different locations. Robert the Bruce had actually been on the English side when King Edward I went against the Scottish puppet king, John Balliol, who was removed from power and then taken to London, but he then joined the rebellion led by William Wallace. When Wallace resigned from the position of Guardian of Scotland, Robert took this role with Sir John Comyn of Badenoch. However, he seized the throne and was coronated. But weeks later, he killed his rival to the crown, Comyn, in a church during an argument. Because of this slaughter, the English king was furious and the Pope excommunicated the new king Robert I, or Robert the Bruce. To begin with, his reign was not successful, as the English army defeated him at Methven, and his wife and daughters were seized and imprisoned, and 3 of his brothers were then condemned and were executed upon Edward I's orders. Because of this, the king had to flee, but he was a skilled military commander and was fortunate at times. In 1307, the Hammer of the Scots, Edward I, died, and stepping into the English king's shoes was his son Edward II. He was not the greatest at commanding troops, but Robert managed to fight back using guerrilla troops against the English who had settled and occupied different parts of Scotland. He pushed the English back, and as time went on, he carved a brilliant reputation for himself. The biggest victory he achieved was at the Battle of Bannockburn, in which the English army outnumbered Robert's men 3-1. And following this, the Scottish monarchy was said to have been independent from the English. But Edward II was persistent, and he did want to command Scotland. But Robert I was declared the rightful monarch, and in this declaration, in which a letter to the Pope, he was solidified in his power. This document claimed that, as the histories of old time bear witness, it has held them free of all the servitude ever since. In their kingdom 113 kings of their own royal stock have reigned, the line unbroken by a single foreigner. But this declaration also carried a message for Robert, as it was said that, were Robert to desist from what he hath undertaken, and be willing to subject us or our kingdom to the king of English or the English, he would strive to expel him forthwith as our enemy, and as a subverter of right, his own and ours, making someone else our king who is equal to the task of defending us. The Pope recognised Robert the Bruce was the rightful king of independent Scotland, and an alliance was renewed with the French. The English deposed Edward II for his son in 1327, and peace was then secured between the 2 nations, and England went back on their claims that they were superior over Scotland. With this, Robert the Bruce had achieved his main goal, and he was seen as a brilliant king. However, in 1329, Robert became ill. He wanted to embark on a crusade in the name of religion, but he was confident that he would leave Scotland in the hands of future safety and kings. He died on the 7th of June 1329, and it's not actually known what killed him a month before he turned 53. Some accounts say he had leprosy, and others say he suffered from tuberculosis, cancer, or a stroke. But even one man accused Robert I of eating eels, which was dangerous for him. The king's body was then embalmed, and his remains were cut open, as was traditional, and his internal organs were to be cut out. His sternum was sawn out of his remains, and his heart was cut out, and this was then to be worn on a chain around the neck of Sir James Douglas. His internal organs were also removed, and these were placed in the chapel of St. Cerf, which was a place where he usually prayed. The king's body was then taken to Dunfermline Abbey for its burial, and this was a huge occasion and was possibly the largest funeral to ever take place inside of Scotland. But Robert I's body was interred inside of a wooden coffin and was buried within a stone vault beneath the floor of the abbey, and a tomb of white marble was made for him. On this plinth carried the inscription, "Here lies the invincible blessed King Robert. Whoever reads about his feats will repeat the many battles he fought. By his integrity he guided to liberty the kingdom of the Scots. May he now live in heaven." But the plan was for the heart of Robert the Bruce to be carried on crusade by Sir James Douglas. But this never took place, and because of this it was said that the heart was rescued and was then brought back to Scotland. Robert had said he wanted his dying wish to be that the heart was taken to the Holy Land, but it never went there, and it was then buried in a lead container at Melrose Abbey. But this was not the end of the story. During the English Reformation, the Abbey church where he had been buried underwent attack and was sacked, and it fell into a poor state. But on the 17th of February 1818, a number of workmen were breaking ground to build a new church on the site of Dunfermline Abbey, and they came across a vault in the front of the former high altar. This vault was covered by 2 large stones, and it had 6 iron handles on the stone, and when they were removed, a vault was found. Inside of this were the remains of a decayed oak coffin and a body which was enclosed in lead. A decayed shroud of cloth of gold was placed over it, and when the coffin was opened, it was found that the head of the body had a shape of a crown had formed, and the vault was then to be secured for further investigation. On the 5th of November 1819, this took place, and the shroud was in a bigger state of decay since the opening of the vault. The body was raised up and was placed on a wooden coffin board at the edge of the vault, and this was covered in 2 layers of lead. And when the lead was removed, it was, without doubt, who this body belonged to. The sternum had been sawn from the top to the bottom, allowing the removal of the heart, and then a plaster cast was taken of the skull, which was detached, and measurements were taken of the bones. It was found that Robert the Bruce was around 5 foot tall. The skeleton of Robert the Bruce was then placed on top of a lead coffin, and many people visited to see the king's remains. But during this, some people stole teeth, finger bones, and other things from the body. Robert the Bruce's remains were later reinterred in the vault in Dunfermline Abbey, and were inside a new lead coffin, and 1,500 pounds of pitch were poured on it to preserve the remains. It had been found that his skull was preserved well with no flesh on it, but this was still not the end of the story. In 1921, workers who were making repairs to the floor of Melrose Abbey discovered a lead casket containing the remains of a heart, and this is presumed to have been Robert the Bruce's. This was rediscovered in 1996, and investigation then confirmed that it did contain the remains of a heart inside of it before it was then reburied the following year. Robert the Bruce is remembered for being the Scottish monarch who managed to see off the threat from the English once and for all. But he was someone who capitalised on the weakness of his enemies, especially after the death of Edward I. He was also a king who was buried in 3 different places, with his vital organs being interred near where he regularly prayed, his heart buried inside of Melrose Abbey after it was taken on crusade, and finally his remains and corpse being interred inside of Dunfermline Abbey. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.